Hello, my name is Susan Piver. I'm a writer and longtime practitioner and teacher of Buddhism. I've come to see that many people think of Buddhism and meditation practices associated with it, like mindfulness, as ways to reduce stress. But I would like to tell you that the Buddhist path is far more rich than that. It is a way to wake up, to become liberated from suffering. And forget about enlightenment, it's also a way to live your everyday life more fully and meaningfully. This podcast is to share with you classical Buddhist teachings that I have found enormously beneficial, and also to tell stories from my own life about how I applied and misapplied these teachings. And I do want to tell you from my more than 30 years of experience that the Dharma is real and it provides an extraordinarily nuanced, profound, and pragmatic guidebook to living a life of wisdom, compassion, and courage. This is going to be a short episode. I'll explain why in a moment. When I was first taught how to meditate close to 35 years ago, the instruction I was given was to take my seat, establish my posture, let my attention rest on the breath, and if I get lost in thought, just let go and come back. However, the instruction for letting attention rest on breath was quite particular in the following way. It was to place more attention on the out-breath and less attention on the in-breath. So in other words, to breathe in because that is required, and then to really let your attention dissolve out into the space in front on the out-breath. And because you want to do that again, you have to breathe in. But the instruction for the in-breath was something like abandon the in-breath and really flow out on the out-breath. Nothing to focus on when you're breathing in, but when you're breathing out, to really place extra attention on that feeling of dissolving into the space in front. Over the many years that have passed since then, I've asked myself, why? As have many students. Why do we place additional attention on the out-breath? And I'll tell you what I have made of it thus far. But first, let me just say that this episode is going to be short because my mom just entered hospice care. And I was there until a couple days ago, and I'll be flying back tomorrow morning, and I'm not sure what will happen at that point, as no one can be sure what is going to happen. So first, let me just say that my mom, Louise, is quite old. She's 96, and she has lived a good life for what that is worth. Of course, it's worth quite a bit. And she's had a very good, healthy life in addition, up until about 8 or 10 months ago. So, wow, really strong person. And she's still in the house I grew up in suburban Washington, D.C. And about 8 or 10 months ago, as mentioned, we started to notice, by we, I mean my brother and sister and I, the inevitable decline, which, as these things go, has been fortunate. The decline is not fortunate, but she's not in pain. She's not sick. She's just old and exhausted and ready to go and very, very, very weak. And somehow all of this relates to the out-breath, because the very first thing that we do when we're born is breathe in. I don't think I need to explain why I say that. And the very last thing we do is breathe out. So perhaps in this instruction for meditation to place extra attention on the out-breath, we cultivate some sense of familiarity with the ultimate dissolve, in this lifetime anyway, which is to let go of this body. I really can't say too much about that because I'm not dead. However, I, like all of you, I'm sure, have my experiences with death and dying. And I'll just share a couple with you very briefly, and then make a few suggestions for how to be with someone who is dying. And my suggestions are not because I have any expertise whatsoever, but because I have thought about it and studied it and tried to do my best, I'm sure like you too. So the first experience that I'll mention is my own near death, which was nothing like what I've read about or what I've seen in movies or heard about. Like your awareness leaves your body and you look down and you see yourself and you go to the light and then for some reason you come back. I didn't have any such experience, but I'll tell you what I did have. So this was a long time ago, 35-ish years ago. I was in a car accident. I was hit by a drunk driver. I was just sitting there in my car at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, coming home from my job as a cocktail waitress at a bar called Antone's. And I was in a 67 Beetle, which is like saying I was in a tin can. And a drunk driver ran a red light. The car next to me saw them coming and slowed down. I did not when my light turned green. And they T-boned me, and I flew out of the vehicle 30 or 40 yards. And I have no memory of it. Everything I'm saying to you is what I read in the police report. No one expected me to live because I had what's called a liver fracture, liver laceration, which normally one bleeds to death because it's very hard to stop your liver from bleeding. In any case, here I am. And I was in the hospital. An ambulance came very quickly. A great surgeon was on call. It took several days of surgical procedures to stop my internal organs from bleeding and stop me from dying and so on and so forth. And for most of that time, all of that time, I was unconscious or in and out of consciousness as it was described to me. I do not have a single memory of anything until I woke up when my mother was sitting there. However, before that, my only memory is of being in some place of torment, not like hell with devils or pitchforks or anything like that, but for whatever reason, and I don't think I will ever know the reason, my overwhelming sense in that fugue state was something really, really terrible has just happened. And I don't know what it is. And I don't know if I did it or if it was done to me. So there was some sense of torment because of this. Again, this is not like I was peaceful and I went to the light. It wasn't anything like that. And then my next memory is I was sort of wandering in a place that had no bearing of familiarity to anything I'd ever seen before. It was like being in a desert. Everything was brown and there was no greenery. I don't know. I can't describe it. But I was wandering there and there was a very, very, very dim prick of sunlight way, way up high in the sky. And I noticed I was holding the hand of a little girl. And we were both sort of just wandering together. And at some point, I think I didn't know which one was me. That's all I remember until I woke up after many surgeries in a 3-day period and a lot of finger crossing and a lot of blood loss. I started to wake up in intensive care, and my mother was sitting there, the very mother who is dying right now. And she was holding my hand. And she said, when I opened my eyes, the thing she thought to say to me was, "Do you know where you are?" And she said, I shook my head no, but I was gripping her hand. And she said, "You're in the hospital. You were in a car accident, but it wasn't your fault." She has said since she doesn't know why she said that. But of course, I know why on some level, because that was my torment. She said my grip relaxed and I went back to sleep. Now, I sort of remember that. But when you're in that state between living and dying or badly injured, because I don't think I was that as close to dying as others have been, people fade in and out of proximity. Like, in ordinary circumstance, if my mother's face was 2 feet away from me, I would be able to recreate that image in my mind. But in this fugue state, the face comes closer and then it recedes, and my memory of that time, I see people in relation to myself at strangely varying distances. So then a month went by. I was still in the hospital. I had developed an infection, and they had tried all these non-surgical ways to relieve the infection, medications and needles and various things. And they wanted to avoid surgery because I had had so much surgery and I was so weak. But then they couldn't avoid surgery. So they had to repair this infection by going in again. And I remember my mother was standing next to me by my bed, and my boyfriend at the time was standing next to her. And that was Derek O'Brien, who composed the music for this podcast. So, quite a long and wonderful relationship I've had with this particular man. And the doctor was standing on the other side, and he said, "We have to operate," because I had just gotten very, 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 very sick from the infection. And I said, "Do you think I might die?" And bless his heart, he said, "I'm going to do my best." And he was the surgeon who had saved my life to begin with. "But I can't promise you because you're very weak. You've been through a lot." At that moment, I felt, I don't even know how to describe it. I didn't feel scared. I didn't want to die, certainly, but I felt focused, like, okay, let's do it. And in the same moment, the face of my mother and Derek, who were right close next to me, and they were touching my arm or holding my hand. It's like in a movie, they whooshed away. It's like they receded in my visual memory. And I realized I'm alone. I'm alone. No one can die but me. No one can live but me, in this particular circumstance. I have to face it alone. No one can face it with me, is what I mean by I realized I was alone. No one can face this with me. And I lived, obviously. And I remember waking up in the post-op recovery room after the surgery, and I opened my eyes and I was like, "I'm alive. I'm not dead." I wiggled my toes. I'm not paralyzed. I just felt, as one might imagine, kind of overjoyed and very strong. I had a lot of surgeries mentioned. My abdominal muscles were cut. I couldn't really, it's not easy for me to sit up is what I'm trying to say, but I sat up, fluffed my own damn pillows, rang the nurse call button, "Bring me some magazines. I'd like a glass of water." I was like, I felt like the surge of energy. And in my recollection, maybe I'm making this up, but the people there, the nurses and other hospital personnel were like amazed. I'm probably making that up, but that's what I recall. Wow, she's back. She's strong. And that's how I felt, whether that memory is accurate or not. And then I was in the hospital for about another month, and then I was released. And Derek took me home to our home. I had all of these materials like syringes to, I don't know what, not needles, but to flush wounds and bandages and ointments and all sorts of things. And we went into our house and sat down, and everything was very odd because, for some months I'd been in an institution environment with center block and not many colors. And anyway, hospital, thank God. And now there were colors and different scents and textures. And I remember looking around and going, wow, everything is like in a glow. Everything looked kind of golden. And then I looked at Derek and I could see that he was feeling it too. I could see it. I could tell. We looked at each other and we were like, whoa, what's happening? And we sat there, I don't know how long, 10 minutes, 5 hours. And then the glow sort of faded. But we both remember it in exactly the same way many, many decades later. So I exhaled and then I inhaled again. Now my mother is approaching her exhale. What do I do? Of course, I can't know what to do. I don't know what will be helpful to her. She's still present and lucid, but her memory is terrible. But she doesn't have dementia. She doesn't have Alzheimer's. She's dying, but not from an illness. Very strange. So all I can do is be there, which I will be tomorrow, and sleep in my old bedroom and be alert to what she needs, make sure she doesn't fall down, support my brilliant, extraordinary sister who has been shouldering the great majority of this because she lives just a few miles away from my mother. And also, it's just the kind of person she is. And hold my mother's hand as she held mine and hope that I will know what to say to her, just as she knew exactly what to say to me when I was in between life and death. That's my prayer. That's my wish, that I can keep breathing in and out and be with her as she breathes out, and hope that my experience and familiarity with what it means to breathe out through my own meditation practice, by the blessing and grace of those who taught me, that she will be supported in her dissolve. So I think I'll close there. May all beings live and die in peace.